I suppose what we're going to be exploring today are those questions of, is it a new thing, is it open and refreshing, or is it a kind of portent that things are doomed to end in disaster? That's sort of our framing. Anyone want to make some noise if they're polyamorous?
Yeah, can we, if you feel brave, can we have a show of hands of like, hands up if you are monogamous. Yay. Hands up if you are in a sort of open-y something, or you have been in the past, or you feel like maybe you'd like to be at some point. A couple brave souls. Great, okay. So there's some people.
Anyone having an affair? I want to open that up and we'll talk about that. We'll start off well. Start confessional. There's a kind of confessional element, isn't there, to today? So I suppose one thing we could start with is just exploring the different ways to be polyamorous. David Harbour and Lily Allen were in an open marriage, which meant presumably that they had, their primary partner was each other, but they saw other people. But what are the different ways in which you can do this?
Okay, I can do a little bit of lingo breakdown, but I also have to say I feel quite tired by the sort of endless categorization of all of this, because it's helpful to have frameworks, but often I find, for context, I've been non-monogamous in some way or other for a decade. This feels very like baked into me. It doesn't feel jangly and terrifying anymore. It's just like the way that I do things. And it takes a while to get to there. And I think it's quite helpful to have different bits of terminology, but I'm always wary of people like really trying to stick to the rules of certain things. I guess I like the phrase non-monogamy, even though it's a mouthful to say, because it's really broad and it can mean lots of different things. The Lily Allen relationship, I mean, I love that we're all speculating where we've just like listened to an album. We've decided that we all deserve to weigh in on this. But as an open marriage, that's a marriage. So that is two people sort of state approved. And there's an openness to it that in their context was very much a sexual thing on paper, but not as much emotional. Polyamory tends to be sort of like sex and feelings a little bit more, although I would argue how well can you distinguish between like physical intimacy and emotional intimacy? I like both of them kind of being mixed up together. But there are loads of different terminologies. I have a whole chapter in my book if you want to kind of get all that lingo down. But I also feel like sometimes it's a deterrent for people because it feels like all of this information that they have to revise for.
Yeah, language does, I mean, without getting too conceptual too early on, the kind of language of it is what seems to be like its virtue, but also kind of a barrier to getting involved. And I suppose then, if the kind of language is intimidating, what is the way into exploring it then?
Well, I think you take the language that's helpful for you, but then you chuck the rest in the bin. You don't have to have everything, and everyone's going to interpret different bits of language and what they're doing in different ways. Like, for as many people as exist in the world, there are different types of relationships. So it's helpful to have a loose guide of language. But the sort of open marriageness of this, I would categorize this relationship as an open marriage, not as polyamorous. And I don't know. There is difference. There isn't difference. I also don't think this was a massively consensual or joyful open marriage. Hot take.
Hot take. I mean, and why is that?
You've listened to
the album. I have listened to the album, I know.
We know.
I know. But it has kind of spoken to this broader narrative that seems to be one that the press are kind of waiting to kind of talk about. When polyamory or non-monogamy kind of pops into the headlines, it's kind of already written as a disaster story, right? There aren't many public successes of it. And there seems to be something that has a narrative of, well, this is either somebody doing it because their marriage is about to fail anyway, and some people are putting it into kind of as a last throw of the dice. And there's also this, with the tabloid aspect, there's this like peculiarly British obsession with kind of celebrity sex anyway. Yeah. So there's a few ways in which this is broken down. In the media, do you think it's generally something that is characterized as something that's doomed to fail?
Yes, big time. I think, I'm going to be a little scathing, but in a way that I hope comes across. Maybe it's not scathing, maybe I'm just saying a sentence. I'm really fascinated by how we hold moral failings in relationships as cautionary tales. And we do that in the media, but we also do that in our social lives of when someone else fucks up, it sort of ends up confirming something in ourselves or soothing us because we're not the ones, we're all in the UK. We've got like shame baked into our very beings. And I think seeing someone else publicly fail and there being a scandal, it's quite affirming because we get to feel some of those feelings, but we don't actually have to be the one who's fucked up. I also think a lot of the time in mainstream media, people are looking for confirmation that something outside of monogamy is doomed to fail, doesn't exist, like in a sort of happy, functioning, secure way, and that it sort of ends up confirming lots of monogamous people's fears. Because I guess over the years of me writing about this and doing workshops, I find sometimes that people who are monogamous can get a bit threatened by the idea of this, and I don't like that. Like I'm not here to recruit anyone. I'm not honestly, I want everyone to be in relationships that feel really happy for them, and I think monogamy can be great, and so can other ways of doing it, and it's not a competition. I also don't think you get cool points for being in a non-monogamous setup or being in an open marriage. And I guess there's a song on the album called Non-Monogamy, which non-monogamy is hard to say. We're just stacking it on top. And there's definitely a sort of cool cachet of going, oh, I'm actually in an open relationship now. And a part of me sort of resents that, because I don't want anyone to feel shamed for the type of relationship they're in, provided that everyone in there is feeling good and happy in it.
So there's no value. You can be a kind of heteronormative, normcore, monogamous relationship in the suburbs,
honestly,
and you're cool with it.
Love that for you.
Yeah, we're all cool with it.
Genuinely love that for you.
Whatever you want to do.
But if I'm loving that for you, then can you love my thing for me?
I mean, that is a bit of a right-wing caricature of anything that is deemed kind of I suppose, outside of the normative framework. It's this caricature, be it with like trans people in schools, or there's this caricature that people are therefore they're evangelists and there to recruit, which I think is a very particular right-wing narrative.
Yes.
Yeah.
But also when we talk about open marriages, like this has been going on forever. My generation hasn't invented this, and also it's not a left-wing thing. It's across the political spectrum.
I'm interested in that.
Yeah?
Because well, in some elements, like ethical non-monogamy, or a comedian, Davina Bentley, has a great line about ethical non-monogamy, which I think is slightly unfair, but she says it's kind of like the Democratic Republic of Congo. Just because you put a word in front of it doesn't necessarily mean it's so. But
that's really mean, Robin.
I think it's
Come
really
on,
mean.
I'm trying my best.
I think that's not about you, but and that's not my joke, by the way. That's Davina. She's great. But what I wanted to kind of get into that is the elements in which it is like queer and progressive, and elements in which it's maybe not. So in some ways, it might be because it's when we spoke earlier, you mentioned it was kind of queerifying culture in the sense that it's questioning heteronormativity, but some ways in which it's done, like a straight guy sleeping with lots of people, doesn't necessarily seem like it's changing much from a political perspective. Yeah. So I'm trying to dig down into this kind of view you have, being both an individual choice and something that does have a progressive element to it.
It definitely can have a progressive element to it. I think for me, queerness and non-monogamy have invited me to think more politically, and that is a choice that I've made within this. I mean, it wasn't always an intentional choice, but I like to think of the way that I'm striving to do things as looking at inherited rules and structures and questioning them and changing them for myself when I feel like that is important, and trying to get rid of patriarchy as much as I can in my life, although it's not going super well, but I don't know, I'm trying my best.
The world's not doing too well.
It's great in me, but then sort of out there it's a bit tricky. But you can use, I mean, what if you want to be a political person in a left-leaning way, you can find your in to do that in loads of different ways. There's relationship anarchy is a kind of, I guess, a way of doing non-monogamy, but it's a much more of a political ideology. It's not going like, I have X amount of partners. It's going, what does it mean to relate to one another? And what if we look at friendship and community with the same value that we do romance and sex? And so that, for me, is really interesting. And that's kind of where I am right now. But there's also lots of people who just want to fuck other people and have a nice time with that. And I think, I can't remember the stat off the top of my head, but in the US, like, swingers are overwhelmingly Republicans. It's a very right-leaning culture. There is a swingers resort in Jamaica that I have almost gone to twice on press trips.
Wow.
And who knows if I will go there at some point, but I think that is full of like white American straight couples in their 50s and 60s who are really Republican, who are like going there to have a little exotic holiday. And I'm fascinated to see what that would look like. I don't think I would want to sleep with anyone there, maybe, but who knows, maybe.
They kind of fuck each other and then fuck the country.
Yeah.
I was dying to get that line in. As you were saying it, I was like, I've got to get this in. So you haven't been to the Republican Sex Fest?
I have not.
No. Okay.
But a friend of mine was shooting a documentary, and she went to the biggest UK swingers convention a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, how was that?
That was really right-leaning. She was staying in a travel lodge, and there were the two rooms next to her on either side. There were sort of orgies going on, but again, and I don't love a right-wing girly, but I guess you're allowed to fuck around too if you want to, and if everyone's on board and consenting and feels good. But I kind of resent the idea that non-monogamy is this sacred, like Guardian reading, left-leaning thing.
I mean, it does have an association with class a bit, doesn't it? And I wonder is that fair? Like, and maybe it has a sense with like people having free time. This reputation. Is that fair? And I'm not trying to roast you. Sorry, I'm not trying to roast you. But like, I am a child-free freelancer, so obviously non-monogamy works for me quite well because I can just take an afternoon off whenever I want to, and that I think practically there's privilege baked into this, that you need to have enough freedom in your life and kind of be out of survival mode in order to do something like this. I don't think it should be a privilege. I think sexual wellness and exploring your identity and intimacy are inherent rights that all of us should be able to use and kind of not use, like sit with and nurture. But the reality of the world is that if you have major stresses in your life, or you are, actively marginalized and under attack, it's harder for you to access this. So, but there's also, there's an argument that non-monogamy is very bourgeoisie, and it's, trying to live like kings. Like, Henry VIII and David Harbour are like not that far away from each other. Like, no, he's not beheaded anyone yet, but there's, if we look at this through the lens of like historically what men in power have been able to do, maybe there is a argument that the middle class are just trying to get a piece of that as well. Maybe. Although I would argue that Henry VIII was kind of aggressively monogamous to the point of quite definitively ending relationships and then starting them. But in a very staggered way, and he couldn't even deal with dealing with. He had to move on decisively in a horrible.
He was hooking up with Anne Boleyn, and she became one of Catherine of Aragon's ladies in waiting for years, for like 6 years.
I suppose that that's true. That is sort of Polly. So
if
we're going to redeem him as a Polly hero,
I'm going to win the weird niche history argument.
Do you think he could be so we want to have Henry VIII? He could be a good poster person for polyamory. Do we think? Okay, but one of the reasons it does come into this idea of like luxury or privilege is something that's often said about it, and maybe we can unpack it because it's probably not fair. This idea that it's just so much work. This idea that polyamorous relationships, when do you have time to see anybody? It's all this emotional work of unpacking your feelings, and the kind of cliched line that swingers, what's the difference between polyamorous people and swingers? Swingers have loads of sex and polyamorous people talk about having loads of sex, kind of thing. I've got another line in, great stuff. But this distinction that it requires a lot of emotional work and a lot of tools. And I mean, part of your job is equipping people with, I suppose, the language is something that is one thing, but the kind of tools that you need in order to negotiate the kind of hinterland of something that is difficult because it is doing it in a new way. And when you have assumptions about what marriage is, there's a whole kind of cultural perspective that you can just imbibe and internalize, but you're kind of on the hinterlands of discovering new stuff. Yeah. And when you're doing that, you're out of your comfort zone and you're discovering new things.
Yeah, for sure. I would say, and again, this is everyone has their own experience, but a common pattern that I see with people opening up a relationship or sort of independently starting to explore relationships in a kind of consensual, less monogamous way, there is a real desire for perfection in all of us, that we can sort of hack our way through this and we'll make no mistakes. There'll be no mess. It's going to be amazing. It's sort of, sometimes I feel like people approach polyamory like starting to drink Huel, of going like, I'm going to be so time efficient. Like, it's going to be great. I've got all this organizational thing. It's going to be amazing. Like, fuck Huel, sorry. But it doesn't work like that. This is messy and meandering, and it takes time and patience, and it takes emotional vulnerability and a very high level of honesty in yourself, and the ability to sit with discomfort and have interesting and difficult conversations, and also not talk things to death so that you fit into that polyamorous trope. But I think if you are giving this a go and you're really interested in this, and everyone involved has a reason why they want to do this. One of the things that I find tricky about the Lily Allen album is that it didn't really feel like this was something that she wanted to do. There's a phrase, Dan Savage coined this phrase, polyamorous under duress, where, you know, there's a threat of, if you don't do this, you will let me down, I will leave you, I'll resent you, whatever it is. And so you can't really call that a fully even Stevens agreement. You don't both have to go in with the same level of enthusiasm exactly, or the same like driving force behind it, but you both need to have a curiosity there. And if you both want this, it takes a couple years for that like panicked jangliness to calm down. I feel like lots of people get sort of overexcited puppy energy, where you're like it's your first walk as a puppy out in the world, and everything is new, and you are so overstimulated, and around every corner there is something that you haven't expected and you have to react to, and that is real, and it's quite, sometimes it can be painful, sometimes it's exciting, but that does calm down if you keep on the road and it's feeling good for everyone. And I guess most of the media stories that we see are people in those first messy years. And that makes me, and that's where the juicy stuff is, and that's where the gossip and the scandal, like, fair enough, I love a bit of gossip, but I wish there were more narratives. Sorry, this sounds really big-headed. I wish there were more narratives of people like me and so many other people who've like trodden this path for a bit longer.
Henry VIII. Yeah, so I'd like to, let's do that a bit then. Let's try and kind of disrupt that that view of it being something that's just doomed to fail. I mean, in your experience and in people you've spoken to for research, but also in your own life, what are the really like successful stories and things that can come out of that kind of relationship?
In what way? What do you mean?
Well, I think you were saying like there's these patterns that we seem to have mostly have stories about the rocky bits at the start.
Yeah.
But then after 2 years, like there's going to be this period where things are difficult, but then stuff gets better. Like what are the kind of what are the benefits? What are the beautiful moments? What are the things that you can see like really working in your own life and in other people's?
Well, you share the load and burden of life a little bit more when you have more people in your life. And we already practice versions of this because we all have multiple friendships and family loves. Like this really isn't that different to having a very committed, community-minded friendship group. I'm just like fucking them sometimes, and that's nice. But sorry, I say that's glib. I mean it seriously. We all, if you are practicing the multiplicity of friendships in a way that you are really looking at people as the people who make your life and who are going to carry you and support you through your life, and them yours, vice versa. There's something really deeply beautiful about that. There's a book I love called Polyamorous Elders, which I strongly recommend. And it's a writer talking about her own experiences and other people that she knows who are over 60. And suddenly it was talking about retirement plans as polyamorous people and how you navigate health and wills and grandkids being shamey and weird. It's a completely different side that I had never considered. And I hope I will get old and I'll be a weird little polyamorous old lady, and there's no framework for that. We don't understand how that is meant to work because it's not been visible. It's been happening in the past, but there aren't those stories that we get to see. I guess the thing is that it's a little bit mundane because then it just is that you're talking about long-term relationships, and I think we are always very drawn to the beginnings and ends of relationships, and we don't give as much space for the middle, which is most of a relationship.
And some of it, I suppose, one thing that I think is interesting conceptually is that because it's kind of being disruptive and a bit anarchic, it's making monogamy and heteronormativity also it's questioning that as a choice. And, you know, polyamory is hard, but relationships are very hard, and monogamy is very hard. And whilst that has a whole level of baked-in assumptions, like, I mean, I'm at school, like a lot of kids, you know, throughout most of the 20th century, there was so much shame associated with any form of, like, desire towards anyone else, and also a kind of language around the ethics of love, where you're almost allowed to treat people differently if you're in a romantic relationship with them. You have to have exclusivity. Maybe, you know, everything is fair in love and war. Maybe you can actually treat them very unfairly. But an idea of, like, queerifying it a bit and saying, hey, this is, all relationships should be founded on some form of friendship. And maybe sex is something that you can put on top of that or move with it. I wonder if there's a kind of interesting way in which it just reframes how we're thinking about the whole spectrum of what it is that we're doing as humans.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I think it speaks to the fact that we carry so much shame about sex, where why, if you are sleeping with someone, does that become a completely different relationship? And I probably think that more with sex than with romance, although both of them, I think, have a real hold on us culturally.
Yeah.
But the idea, you know, if I'm trying to reframe the notion of jealousy, going like, you have multiple friends, you might have multiple children. You're not going like, well, I care about you more, so therefore you're less important. But I write a lot about the sort of scarcity mindset when it comes to our emotions, particularly towards romance. That it's kind of like a capitalist mindset that you only have so much love to give. And so you have to be really careful with it and guard it. And if someone gets it, that means something really, really important. And heaven forbid if they give a bit of theirs to someone else, it's something that's being like taken from you. Mm-hmm. All of these narratives about ownership and capitalism are very baked into the way that we talk about love. And we are limited in terms of time. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm not like you. We also have to do our laundry and like take the bins out and call our mums and that stuff.
And each one of those opportunities is a chance for romance.
Ew.
What am I doing? Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
Sorry, that was a big old ramble.
So
but
it's interesting, and the constraints of time, and kind of like, as you were saying as well, I think so much within like relationships and love, there's a desire to try and essentialize, to go, oh well, humans have always been polyamorous because of insert cave person scenario here, or humans have always been monogamous because, you know, the one partner would go out and gather berries. There's this attempt to essentialize stuff. But actually, we're living in a very historically contingent, specific moment when it comes to love, where relationships have to give us everything. They have to give us romance, stability, and we have a kind of romanticization of them in a way that historically wasn't the case. You'd marriage because, you know, Darren down the street had a really good ploughing arm or had a really good parsnip yield.
But also, adultery has been happening forever. There are more people who are cheating than there are who are non-monogamous, like polyamorous, sort of ethically, consensually non-monogamous. But people don't like to admit that.
And they therefore don't show up in surveys, probably.
Yeah. But this isn't... And I also kind of resent the argument of going like, you're just kidding yourselves being monogamous. Like, that's bullshit. Monogamy can be a really wonderful, beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And it's not... I don't like... Again, that goes into a bit of sort of biohacking, Huel drinking. Like, I'm actually more evolved because I've accepted that monogamy is a fallacy. And like, no, that's boring. Let's not do that. I feel like I'm ostracizing a lot of my community and my people, but I feel like I do this because it makes a lot of sense to me, and it's fun, as well as sometimes it being a bit emotionally jangly, and it's really transformed the way that I see friendship and care and respect, and I think I could have come to that in other ways. But, you know, if I'd become really invested in an allotment community and gone, oh, wow, this is what community feels like. But I've just ended up doing it a lot through the way that I have relationships.
Interesting. Have you thought of kind of integrating the allotment polyamory thing? Yes, you have. Okay, that's good. It's good to know. Okay, and I suppose, so if anyone is thinking about it, exploring it, like, I'm interested in that question of the first 2 years are jangly. Something that people often say, they put a thing on Instagram saying, what would we like to ask Ruby? And one of the questions that comes back is like, how do you stop falling in love with someone else? Or this idea of threat and how you navigate that. So what are the kind of main tools or things to watch out for anyone navigating it?
Yeah, I find that idea of sort of how do you stop falling in love with someone else is a very limiting fear, I guess. And if you are doing this, you are inviting a level of chaos and uncertainty into your life. That is, we can try and control that. And you can put some practical boundaries in to limit that. But it's also, I don't know if we should be surprised when feelings develop when people are also sleeping together. Like, there is an amazing therapist called Nikki D who has a framework it's called the sort of 7 stages of co-creating an open relationship. And she was very kind and let me include it in my book, and I interviewed her. She's incredible, and I don't think I can remember all of them off the top of my head, but should we try?
Yeah, let's do it.
It's, okay, imagining, so big blue sky, like what could this be? Thinking about that on your own and then in partnership. Discussion, contracting, somethinging, doing. Oh, I'm sorry. I've lost the plot.
The first few were good.
And then it's just imagine and discuss, guys. That's all. No, you kind of have to action it, and then it's this idea of reevaluating and getting to a place that feels kind of calmer at the end and celebrating how far you've come, but knowing that cycle will keep coming back again and again, and there's renegotiating and conversations. And even saying that makes me feel a bit tired, because in the early years there is a lot of chat, and it's kind of boring sometimes, and it's really important. I don't want people to under communicate, but I also think you can run the risk of over communicating a bit, and sometimes it's instinctively it's figuring out when to do little baby steps or when to do big leaps. And sometimes you'll do a big leap and go, oh, that was a mistake, I shouldn't have done that. But it's kind of trying to hold it all a bit lighter and looser.
Yeah.
Because what if you try something and it goes wrong, and everyone goes, oh, fuck, that went really wrong, didn't it? Okay, back to the drawing board, let's figure it out.
Or maybe a sense as well that things can be like unavoidably painful, and words are a way of coping with that, but they're not going to completely remove that feeling. Like you're going into uncharted territory, and you don't know what the landscape's going to look like.
For sure.
Yeah.
I also think until you try this, it's always going to feel more scary. Obviously sometimes you do things and they feel horrible and difficult, and that's really tough, but also I would say that's a part of being alive. But also, because we come from this very generationally monogamous, shamey environment, there is so much fear about what something like this might feel like. And I think through practicing it kind of de-escalates a lot of that panic. It's like, oh wow, I did the scary thing and it was okay. It was okay.
Yeah.